progression. They used to call she and I very liberal, you see, but we weren't liberal, we were progressive. And there's a big difference. And that spirit that we generated back there when we had nothing to work with, but we built a spirit and made people think we had everything. And people in Washington, we convinced them that this was a great community. I'll never forget, one day I got a call and from the Coast Guard and said, we'd like to give you a light ship. I said, a light ship? What am I going to do with a light ship?
Give it to Portsmouth.
And I said, he says, well, we were talking up here, and the different people said, well, Hampton is a very progressive town. If we give them that light ship, they will do a good job with it. And that made me tremendously proud, and I checked with council, see if I could accept it. It doesn't cost us anything. I got a man that tore it down for nothing. The shipyard put it up and fixed it so it wouldn't sink for nothing. And so we got a light ship, but we got it because the people in Washington said we were a progressive city and would do a good job. So that was the kind of pride and spirit that we had, and I'm glad to see we've gotten back to that spirit.
I
thought they were going to give the city away.
I gotta say something about that light ship.
Would you hold your point just 1 second? My problem is we're coming at the end of the tape,
We got to change tape.
and I lose it.
We can have a code now.
Yes.
Yeah. Please don't forget your
Well,
point.
no, let's make the light ship point up now.
Yeah.
I like the end of the light ship story though.
Yeah,
So it goes over to
I've already heard this story.
I sold the
And
light ship. Mr. Kilgore got upset with me because I stepped out in front of the council. Mr. Johnson didn't accept it in the first place. But then we sold the light ship to that brilliant city manager, Bob Williams. You know, and it didn't have a motor.
Well,
More importantly, it didn't have a bottom.
Window.
It's saying.
So you're selling it at Portsmouth. So I go see my daddy over in Portsmouth. He said, what the hell are you birds over in Hampton doing to us in Portsmouth? Selling us a light ship for $25,000. We need a light ship like we need a holy light.
Joe Biden on the chicken hunt.
He got that on camera.
Are we ready? You ready to roll? Why don't we pick up with you, Mr. O'Neill, relative to the
Did I get to talk about windows
splash
county?
party?
Well, I just wanted to be, one of the qualities that I think is important, if you look around, and I may disagree a little bit with Tom's assessment of the regional governments, and none of them will work. Some of them have worked, and I think they're very successful. But if you look at communities that we would look to say they are successful, the community is vibrant, exciting. There are things going on. The people are involved in what. The critical difference, it has nothing to do with locations or assets or any of those things. It has to do with leadership. It has to do with the ability to perpetuate leadership. We're willing to tackle the kind of issues that we raised in these questions and we're talking about today. And if you lose that ability to perpetuate that kind of leadership, the people who will step forward and tackle it, I don't care where you are, what kind of assets you've got, what kind of capabilities you've got, you just don't have it. I mean, you can go to Gary, Indiana, or you can go to some place who's the most booming city of the Sun Belt, and if you find a leadership core and an ability to perpetuate that leadership core long enough to deal with some of the substantive issues, you have an exciting community. And I think Charlie was the one who, one of the things we need to do is to make sure that we continue to provide an environment where we have leaders who are willing to step forward and take the issues, whether they be regional, whether they be ones that are exclusively Hamptons or whatever. And I think that's what will continue to distinguish us either as a good community, or if we don't do it, something will put us in the second tier of communities in the state.
I would expand on that a little and say that one of the ways I think you can describe Hampton is that even though it has all of the amenities of an urban area, there's still a small town atmosphere about it. And we have maintained neighborhood spirit, such as I've always thought the community spirit in Phoebus was wonderful. There's a great community spirit in Northampton, in other sections. That's one of the reasons I think that the party at the Point worked so well this summer, because everybody had a chance to get together in one place and be neighborly. And I think that you want to hang on to that feeling. By the same token, you can build good leadership that way because people feel responsible for the city, because they do feel it's theirs. And I think that the same thing Jimmy mentioned and Charlie and everybody, but it's just that little cohesiveness that you have. Because I do agree, other cities have pride in themselves. But I think people feel like government is accessible to them here, and I think they feel a responsibility for it.
Well, I feel less that way today than I did at one time. I think that government is tending to become, government at all levels, and I see it in the city of Hampton now, is tending to become professional. And the danger that represents to me is that they do only talk to each other. It becomes what Nixon described as intellectual incest.
But don't you believe, though, the professionalism comes really from the higher professional level of staff?
I don't mean in that sense. I mean that it's become ingrown. It
I
is
see.
not
A
seeking
business,
the
yeah, I didn't know that.
advice of the community as much as it used to, in my opinion. Of course, I attribute a lot of that to the loss of the two-party system. I think that it's certainly something I work for, and maybe not everybody around here believes in it, but I have
Oh, I do, I
always
think that's important.
believed, well, you voted to abolish it, so.
I did on the council.
Yeah.
At that time, I thought that was the right thing. I still think it's all right for council not to be, but I...
Well, I don't, but
this is
and
good.
that idea didn't prevail, so I think there is that was a source of new blood that can shut off. It's a philosophical grounding in government, philosophy of government that ought not to have been lost.
I may have to agree with you,
I can see that argument, David.
David.
Another point I'd like to make that has to do not with specifically what we have special, like except in the lakes, but where does that special attitude come from? There's no question there's a spirit that permeates this community by virtue of its leadership. It has to have that in order to develop the leadership that fosters it. There's something else that occurs that has to do more with place. That is, the uniqueness of our community in the Hampton Roads area fosters a certain cosmopolitan influence that is bound to bring about these elements of spirit that generate and permeate through the whole community to bring us to where we are. I.e., the military has consistently had a big role to play, and that cosmopolitan attitude brought about by the experiences of the military throughout the world coming back to this area, the technological advances made by virtue of military services, NASA that has certainly an intellectual capability that reflects on this community.
Well, they brought educated people here also.
That's right. And we have an institution in the Hampton University that has brought about a different mixture of demographic consistency that might exist here that brings something in the spirit. So what I'm saying is there's something special, all right, but those special things are brought about because of where we are and because of some of the facilities that are located. Otherwise, I don't think those same spirits exist. There are spirits exist in other communities by virtue of some major catastrophe that may have occurred, by virtue of some unique location that brought about a different citizen. And I think that those different things that have occurred in this community have been related to scientific research that's been done, the military, the port facilities, and in general the cosmopolitan attitude that's permeated this whole community. One of the other things I think we can be proud of and makes us special is we're located, the fifth largest community in the state is located in the Hampton Roads area. That makes us pretty special. If you look out throughout the whole country, you'll find that communities that locate themselves around major economic resources such as port facilities have a uniqueness in their own right, and that's something that we've gained by virtue of location.
I've always preached this to people outside of the area. I've said that there's no better place than Hampton. We have it all, even in the worst periods of economic depression or unemployment. We have it because of the military facilities. We have every type of military facility, not just a base, but a headquarters, and the shipyard, and NASA. So we think we are an area of great expectations for many people from all walks of life. And speaking of quality of life, that's a good word, but it doesn't mean the same to all of us. a good quality of life would be a beer party every Friday night at Mill Point to some people. Others would want a symphony or ballet. But as long as we can try, Mayor Eason, to provide something or a little of something for everybody, Hampton will still be a great place in which to live.
Yeah, what we could do is have a symphony and a ballet with a beer party at Mill Point.
Well,
We
had
tried that.
You had that in the spring.
We
First
had that in
concert.
May.
First concert this spring.
That was my idea when we built the Coliseum, to provide something
Have a
in
beer
that
party?
building for
Party
everybody.
with a ballet.
Not to load it with rock shows, or not load it with athletic type of things.
I think that
So, follow up on what Tom said, when anybody ever asked me what the assets of Hampton were, this is what I always tell. Number one, the type of people you have here, because you have NASA that brought in a lot of intellectual, educated people. You have the Air Force that brings in a cosmopolitan type of people from all over the world. You have the shipyard that provides an employment for a large segment of people. And the shipyard is the only one that when they get down on orders and have to lay people off, the area suffers. The military and NASA, that's one of the reasons we stay so stable on employment and economic conditions. And the next reason is the fact that when we changed to a city, before it was strictly a rural town and a rural Virginia county, and people like Mrs. Kilgore came in and started a progressive idea of government providing leadership to the community, then that became a great asset, because we began to progress and meet the needs of the people that lived here. So that those things are in my estimation, in the past, have been the greatest assets and will continue to be some of the greatest assets. The leadership continues to be progressively. And we have no great disaster that the shipyard closes or the military shuts down. We will continue to progress.
Let's ask Wendell to comment on that,
Yeah,
bringing
I would like
his
to.
vantage point from leaving and coming back.
I think Mr. Johnson retired just at the perfect moment, and we had a depression. And the very
I thought it was
things,
when Bob O'Neill got here.
the very things that you described as assets, they are assets. They have the wonderful employment that you have. And I was here when we were having a lot of fun, as you are doing right now. The economy is up right now. But when I became city manager, the first thing I had to do was cut back some 300 public employees. And the business community became concerned because the mainstay of the economy had changed a bit. And so it flattened not only here, but in many places. But what happens to the community if the Russians and the Americans decide that we have no need for all of our defenses that we now have been putting together the past few years, that I think probably is driving your prosperity right now? That's why the pursuit that you have ongoing to diversify your economy is so very important. And so it was not a fun time to be city manager while I was city manager. And I think that we did an incredible job in getting things in check in time to avoid disaster and to be in a position where the community can move forward again. And I love that. That's wonderful. But I would caution you not to count on the government to be the mainstay of your future.
One thing you didn't have was leadership during that time. That made it immediately telephone.
Well, who wants to preside over a mess, you know? And so we had a messy moment. That'll get edited out.
Let me shift gears a minute, ladies and gentlemen, if you will. Show me that was not a Freudian slip.
Slip 'em.
Ms. Kilgore, and I want to take advantage of before you left. Hampton High School has just won a national award for excellence. And at the same time, peninsula suburbs are perceived to have a higher educational mechanism than we have here in Hampton. What issues do you perceive us to have here relative to Hampton's public education's image and its level of achievement? I think you mentioned something earlier about a special school.
Well, I think that that National Award for Excellence is given to schools who offer a good education to a very diverse school population. Now, the so-called suburbs, as you call it, don't have diverse populations. And the demands on them are not nearly as great as the demands on an urban school such as Hampton High School. In addition to general education and college preparatory education, which is what the suburban schools offer primarily, you'll call on in Hampton to offer remedial training for children who have come from backgrounds that are lacking. You are required to offer extensive vocational education, and you are also required to offer a great deal more special ed than a smaller school system would probably have. They probably wouldn't equal in the whole system more than one school in Hampton would have. So I think when you put all those things together and you consider the scores, I think Hampton is at a par or better than the suburban schools we talk about. And I think the job we have is for the school system somehow to let the public know the opportunities that are there for children. The average citizen has no idea what the schools offer in terms of the things that are there, in my opinion. And I think we need somehow to disseminate that information.
Grace, you have any comments in that regard?
On public education?
Yes, sir.
Well, obviously, I'm a strong advocate of public education, and I think it's going to be even more important in the future than it has been in the past, because I don't know how much y'all talked about where we're going, but obviously everybody has tracked the change from the agricultural to the industrial to the service and now to the information society. And one of the things that are going to be critical to survival in the information society is education. Education is going to be extremely important. And also when you look at the fact that in projecting out relative to the demographics as to the number of people, the baby boomers, so to speak, as they mature into the age group of 38 to 44 here in the next 5 to 10 years, there's going to be millions of jobs lost by that group who are in the mid-management level, simply because of the information society, simply because of America, businesses looking at its organization and cutting out a lot of management levels. There are going to be millions of jobs lost in that age group. And what that means is that those people are going to have to be also retrained. So I think a combination of being so dominant in the information society, the needs to cope with that, and the problems that the baby boomers are going to be faced with as far as employment opportunities in 5 or 10 years is going to be put even more of a pressing demand on education. And I really believe, and I think a lot of statistics show, that education will be the biggest industry in the United States by the 1990s. And so I think that we have to keep that in mind, and it's no question that we have had some problems here in Hampton, but I think that the main reason for that has been the tremendous decline in the enrollment. Back in the early 70s, the school enrollment was at 32,000 plus. This year, it's at 20,000. Every year for the last 13 years, it's declined. And we all know the problems that that's caused. The school closings, the laying off of people, the cutting back on the programs. And I think for the last 3 years, our main focus has been on trying to stabilize that enrollment so as to at least have some means to get the maximum state aid, since that's based on the number of kids that we have in school. And so we're very pleased. I think this is the first year that we are close to stabilizing the school enrollment from what it was last year. And then coupled with the commitment from the people who, well, Governor Robb particularly, and now Bilal's, is saying that they made a commitment to fully fund the standards of quality. I really think that the best days really are ahead of us. I think we've passed some very trying times in public education, at least here in Hampton. The best days lie ahead, but there's a tremendous a commitment and a tremendous obligation, I think, on those who are in the leadership role to recognize what the needs of education are going to be in the next 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, I'd like to comment that I generally agree with that. The academic type of educational background, I'll leave that to the academicians, the people who really train youngsters from the time they get into school to the time they graduate. That's a different level of education. I assume that's in place, and with the astuteness of the educators, that'll continue to be in place and develop itself accordingly. The point that you touched on, which I think is very important, is there is a continual, although there's good signs on the horizon that it's beginning to show itself, as a continual position about individuals not to take up technical trades and backgrounds in order to bring about the very thing that you have to have in order to build a city or to build anything else physically. The New Horizons Center is probably the best start we've ever had to really bring that about. I'll back up a minute and say the community college concept brought about in Virginia was probably the first big step to address that question. A little bit surprised that most community colleges always try to aspire to a 4-year university, a 4-year college or a university. I think that's a big mistake. But at any rate, the community colleges were the first step to recognize that. What we're doing in New Horizons is a step locally to further recognize that. Somehow, you've got to give dignity and purpose to people who study and school themselves into technical fields, because they are very important to us. You don't accomplish anything in this world until somebody grabs hold of the tool to turn the spade of dirt or to drive the nail. It just doesn't occur. You can lead it all you want, but until you've got the technicians in place to bring it about on the ground, it just doesn't happen. So the leadership role that ought to be aspiring today should look more astutely at the question of the technical needs of the community and the education of those technical needs. And I think we've got some of that going now, but I think you ought to foster it further.
Well, I think that's a good point. I have been concerned at what appears to me to be an acceptance of the service or information society, that where the jobs are going to be in the next 20 or so years. We cannot become an incompetent society that can only tell each other how things are done and buy all our electronics from Japan and automobiles and our steel, everything else hard, and can't do anything for ourselves anymore. And I mean, we talk about our trade deficit now is a major economic problem this country has. I think that there are going to be great educational opportunities, and I think there are new fields that didn't exist when I was, I know that. There are many new fields that didn't exist when I was in school. And I'm still a young man, right? But we've also got to get back to being able to do some of these things for ourselves. I've always thought that we should honor a man who can fix carburetors at least as much as a lawyer.
We're going to honor him even more whether we like it or not.
Don't be a mess if I've got to fix carburetors.
That's right. And they're getting more complicated to fix.
Yeah, but you're missing a big point here now. You don't need the man anymore to fix the carburetor, because it's cheaper to put a new carburetor on. So why should I learn about carburetors if all I'm going to do is buy a new one? And I bet all of us face that at least once or twice
Somebody's
a
got to
week.
put the carburetor on.
That's right, they're so technical, I can't even put them on anymore.
So, but why do you, but you got, I mean, it caused, why should I learn this trade if I'm not going to work at it? It's,
The only element that we have not really sufficiently covered this afternoon was that dealing with the intangible called the quality of life. And I think someone alluded earlier that is, by definition, like beauty, it's in the eye of the beholder. We have been working on that. We, meaning the city of Hampton, have been working in that regard relative to establishing and defining a quality of life for ourselves in establishing that particular criteria. I'd like to hear some comments from any and all of you relative to the
I'll
elements
have
of
very
quality of
short
life.
comments on that. I think that it's right, that the quality all depends on the person that's looking for quality, as to what he thinks his quality of life may be. But you must strive to get an atmosphere for that person to have his quality of life. That is, you must do everything you can to provide jobs, so economically a person can have that quality of life. And then if you can accomplish that, then you must have housing that gives him quality of life. And then you go from that to the recreation and cultural things. It appears that the majority of people would rather have recreational quality of life than they would have the theater and those types of things, far more attendant. But if you provide all of those, each person can then decide on what his quality of life is. And you can't accomplish it completely, but you can do the best you can.
I'd like to comment just briefly on that. I think you're right. Quality of life is in the eyes of the beholder. I think that we have basically a good quality of life in and around the Hampton Roads area, and more specifically in the city. I have no problems in obtaining the things that I want to obtain in this community. If I don't, adjacent communities provide those facilities that give me the capability to enjoy the quality of life. If there's history that I'm interested in, we abound in history. If there are facilities that provide capability for entertainment in the visual sense, there's certainly plenty of that. If there's the need to look at the more intellectual capabilities of our community, we have it in our universities and our schools. But let me expand a moment on what's generally perceived to be quality of life and what that culminates in. When we say quality of life, we begin to think of the arts, music, those things that most of us enjoy after we've reached a level at which we can enjoy. But they always designate facility, and they most always then designate place. And that means that if you designate place, then you have only one resource, and that's the land that you occupy. So if you're going to talk about quality of life, and you're going to relate that almost immediately to facility, be it a library, be it an auditorium, a theater, or whatever, then you most specifically have to say, where is it going to be located, how many people are going to attend it, what's the best access spots for it, and how much it's going to cost relative to the scope of that facility. Some way or another, if you're gonna relate yourself to all of those things, you're gonna get right on down to the managers saying, we're gonna have us a theater out here next to the Coliseum, wherever it may be, for performing arts, because that enhances the quality of life in one area. Right away, the council, the city manager, and the citizen generally have got to talk about resources in order to provide that. That opens up a whole different segment of what you're going to do relative to this question of quality of life. And so I think you got to be very careful about what you mean by quality of life as it relates to facility. If that's what you're talking about, then you can go to the books and say every major city that reaches a population of thus and so can support these type of facilities. You know, there's a big question whether we can, and we know this for a fact, whether we can support a coliseum per se for it to be totally self-supporting. You know, it has been totally self-supporting, although there's some good indications on the horizon here. And there were some examples of what you could do to make it self-supporting. But by and large, you're not going to be able to provide a performing arts theater here that's going to be self-supporting, in my opinion. Because I don't think there's that character in the demographic makeup, social makeup of this community that's going to support it 100%. But Does it provide a quality of life relative to those people who like to look for it? It certainly does, but it's going to cost you money to do it. It might cost you big money.
George, I'd like to hit the quality of life from a little bit different angle, rather than maybe to facilitate. This has been one of our goals of the council the last 3 years, to enhance the quality of life. Obviously, we've had some problems in really coming up with some indicators as to what indicators, what is something that we can measure Hampton versus some indicator to tell us whether we have a good quality of life or not. And we had a hard time groping with that, and I think that was sort of the basis of your question. And so, in my thinking about this, I think that really a quality of life directly correlates to self-esteem. And every one of us in the city of Hampton, people here at the table, all of us want to have a good self-esteem. All of us want to feel good about ourselves. And I think as we look at the quality of life indicators, maybe we should hit it at a different angle. Maybe we should get into the psychology of self-esteem and what makes people feel good about themselves, because I would submit to you that some of the things that we have done have as much to do with quality of life, but we haven't put them under that category. For instance, the road resurfacing program that I think everybody at this table has contributed to because it's lasted 6 or 7 years. I think that has been the single most important thing that the city has done in many, many years, because we have seen so many positive results from that road resurfacing program, where neighborhoods who were on the verge of maybe really going into a deteriorating state, now once that road was resurfaced, they all of a sudden start cleaning up. And it's because people feel good about themselves. And I think that's one example. The arts and the recreation and all that, yeah, that's part of it, but we should focus on what really makes somebody feel good about themselves.
Beautification program.
Yeah, that and there's so many things on that, and I'm sorry I missed the question about what you would do with $20 million, and because I'd like to answer that, because at the break I've heard that we would put it in drainage, and I've heard we put it in capital projects, and I've heard that we put it in economics and all, but I'd like to throw out one thing, and Bob may have said this because he and I have talked about it before. If I had $20 million that somebody put in my lap today, I'd start a foundation for this city and try to use that money. Did you cover that, Bob? Okay, I would use I'd use that $20 million and say to the citizens of Hampton, we've got $20 million, and try to leverage that $20 million by private contributions and hopefully get up to $30 or $40 million. And with the idea that foundation would be to set up and to use the income on an annual basis to basically enhance what we would call these quality of life or self-esteem or feel good kind of characteristics. And in doing that could in effect reach all of our citizens, to touch all of our citizens in one way or the other. And I think when you look at the successful communities across the country, I don't know if you have one in Charlotte or not, Wendell, but I know for instance, in Indianapolis, some of the cities have foundations. Some of the big businesses in those cities, like the Eli Lilly, has set up a major foundation in Indianapolis to, in effect, address the quality of life factors of a community. And if I had $20 million, that's what I would do, is set up a foundation and really to address what somebody could focus in on as being the self-esteem factors of a human being.
Well, if it were your 20 million, that'd be fine, but if it were $20 million of public money, then it becomes a big question how you know how to pick out those things that are going to be beneficial to everybody. You know, there are a lot of things. Hampton is a blue-collar community. Anything wrong with that? I got on a blue shirt myself today. But a lot of these elitist type things, the theater and the ballet and so on.
Well, that's why I said self-esteem. I'm trying to get away from the arts.
Well, you didn't get away from it, though, because the first example you used was paving the roads. and that's what I'm saying, that self-esteem is brought about by virtue of feeling good about yourself. You can feel good about yourself in a good environment. You feel lousy about yourself in a bad environment. Now, those environments can be brought about by many different things. A bad road system can lower self-esteem. This crummy city got a lot of sloppy roads in it. As soon as you pave your roads, everything, oh, look at all the nice new roads you've got. That makes you feel good. So I'm saying that the relationship of what you say when you say quality of life almost invariably gets itself back into some physical situation that you have to deal with. And the roads was probably a better example than what I gave when I said theaters and things like that. For instance, the street signs that you're beginning to put in today is a great idea relative to self-esteem. You can see them, they make you feel good when you can spot roads, and it's part of that. But you had to build the sign, and it had to be put in place.
Dave, I think Mayor Montague didn't finish, and then Wendell wanted to say something. I think Mrs.
Oh, he
Kilgore
did?
wanted to say something.
I
Really,
think,
well, Ms. Kilgore's gotta leave in a
No,
few
go
minutes.
ahead,
Let's
David.
hear her
You
last
this
comment.
is quick. Now, I feel foolish, but I can't remember the street, but it's the extension of the street off the end of Hampton Roads Avenue going down toward,
Bell Street.
okay, Bell. For just a few bucks on curb and gutter street improvements in that little 2-block area, every single house on that street
Looks better.
was transformed.
And Ms. Lyons is happy.
And yes, Ms. Lyons lives there, of course. That was a wonderful example that you gave, as a matter of fact. A relatively small piece of public encouragement can do wonders.
And for the people in Grandview, for $1,000 a foot, you can build them a seawall, you're gonna increase the The question is, how much money are you gonna spend for that?
Ms. Kilgore?
I was gonna say, I think the quality of life is up to individual people. If, you know, the person who loves living in Hampton is gonna love living in Roanoke or love living in Richmond, people are the kind of people who like where they live or they don't like where they live. I think the city's responsibility is to provide a healthful and a secure and as beautiful environment as you can. And then all these other things you're talking about, fine art centers, all the people are going to come for those. They're going to be the ones who spearhead that. You know, I'm not sure the city, people spearheaded the Coliseum coming. And I think if you do that kind of things you're talking about with the road resurfacing, with the beautification program we've done, with the good police force, people are going to be happy. And I think it's up to the individual.
Well, I missed my point when I used the theater or something. What I'm saying is, quality of life relates itself to something most likely physical in nature, no matter what you want to talk about, street signs, whatever.
Wendell?
The one thing that's kind of disturbed me over the past 10 years or so of being a part of and then watching, since then, the budget development in Hampton has been the seemingly overriding goal of the councils was to see how much we could cut the tax rate. And I've always kind of felt that was not really the basic issue, but what does the community needs, how do you address those needs, then you set the tax rate. I learned that from Mr. Johnson.
That was always my idea.
Our taxes always went up.
Those of us that came late appreciate it.
I just have to say, I have to go, and I think you've all been wonderful today. And you know the quote from Browning, grow old along with me, the best is yet to be. Thank you.
Always a pleasure.
See you.
Yeah, Mr. White, you did wonderful on that.
Well, I'm not finished.
Oh, you're not?
You need in the public treasury some monies to do some things that enhance beyond just the housekeeping chores. However, that's your choice. If you decide only to be safe and only to have good roads and only to have utilities, that's your choice. But I don't believe that the community at large really feels that way wherever you are. When I went to Charlotte, I found that they wanted to spend $300,000 a year taking care of the trees. I was amazed at that, but I have since come to understand that that's pretty important. When we ran into some problems in our uptown area with the pavers, I had the sense finally to plant some flowers. Now we have become a place where the flowers are overshadowing some of the physical problems with the street, and I still am employed. What I've also noted in Charlotte that you might want to pick up on, or some other communities as a matter of fact, is that the community will organize to build its museum, as was the case with Discovery Place in Charlotte, which is a show place, or with the new Mint Museum, which is also a show place, and Spirit Square Theater, which is also an outstanding place. and then come to the local government and in partnership, through a public referendum, vote to tax themselves to build some of the facilities that you're talking about. That's the best indicator, I think, of whether or not the community really wants some of these things that are beyond, in the way of capital outlay, beyond what we normally think are our basic responsibilities.
You say vote, what do you mean?
Well, we've had,
Yeah,
in
referendums
North
on
Carolina,
those
you have
facilities?
referendum, but you could do the same simply by having the private fundraising drive and see to what extent the community is interested in building spatial places or the foundation, as the mayor has mentioned. And then come in partnership with the community at large, and those dollars put together can give you a much better facility.
We've had this discussion relative to the quality of life. Let me pose this issue to you. I think it's a given, or it's generally accepted, that the new library that we're constructing currently in the city of Hampton is a definite factor towards enhancing the quality of life. When a community is devoid of these kinds of situations, these kinds of facilities, what is the price to the community? What do we pay? What do we lose?
Well, you take library as an example. I'm afraid if you took a referendum on building a new library, $3 million or something, that it might lose. There are things that the city must push. Nobody will vote for a new jail. You've got to push it. You have to have a new jail. Some bridges and some things like that. Some roads. It's just like I always said on sewers, for instance. If a majority's got sewers, they're not going to vote for put sewers in some other area, you see. So there's certain things that the city must just push ahead with and almost shove down the public's throat. But you're right, Wendell, on the finer things. You have to be very careful there and get the feel of the people in doing those, and have the people really want them, or you get in trouble. Like we got in trouble on the city hall, and we got in somewhat trouble on the Coliseum by a small number of people, but they gave us a rough time. And there are things.
So you never had them on the book at that time?
No, you'd never made it on a boat. Although I sort of think that Mrs. Kilgore and Tom Waters, and I don't know whether Charlie was running that time or not, won on the basis of their backing the Coliseum.
Well, your question, George, as to what do you lose, I think that there's growing evidence that people who either stay in communities to do business or are looking to communities to come into from a new standpoint are looking at more factors now than maybe what they did before. Sure. It's not only just the cost of operations, and certainly the cost of operations for that company to be in a community is probably certainly the top of the list, but they're now going beyond that and looking at these so-called quality of life features here that we're trying to get a handle on. And I think that and we have seen that in the last several years when people have come into Hampton looking to locate a plan and provide the jobs and all that we're looking for. They ask these kind of questions about what kind of this do you have, and what kind of that do you have, and what kind of opportunities for my employees beyond their normal working hours. So beside maybe a quality of life feature for our citizens is also an enhancement, so to speak, to the economic development effort that we're trying to do.
That's the biggest push you have on.
I'd like to make a point on that. I meant to make it earlier, and it's something I think we all know, but we give very little attention to. However, the older we get to give more attention to. And that is that we have a significant number of residents in this community that retire and continue to retire. The primary purpose for that is, as I understand it, or my opinion is the primary purpose, is because of the military installations that are here and what those military installations provide in the way that most of the retired people are, in fact, military. There's a growing need in this community, if you want to continue to hold the retired individual, which is a basic economic resource. They provide millions of dollars into this economy, whether we understand it meticulously or not, they do. That's money usually coming from the outside into this area. So it's a basic economic dollar. They do not have, however, facilities in this community to perpetuate their location here relative to their retirement, i.e. life care type facilities that say once your family for the most part is gone, and you want to relate yourself to a smaller facilities, you have the life type of facility that's going to sustain you through 60, 70, 80 years old or whatever. We don't have that. And most of it's moving away from this area. So if you're going to kind of protect that relative to the question of quality of life for the retired person that lives in this area, you ought to at least support, if not push directly, those kind of facilities that will come in here and provide those life care type units and facilities. Because that's an important economic reality that I think is being woefully overlooked.
George, can I ask Wendell a question as part of this discussion?
By all means.
Okay. And I don't know how much you discussed this before I came, but I think there was a question we were asked to focus on relative to weaknesses or so that the community had. And I'd like to ask Wendell something and his observation of Hampton and going to Charlotte, particularly what you said about the public being out front relative to some of these quality of life things. I guess my perception of one of our weaknesses is the fact that being somewhat of a bedroom community and not having maybe the regional or national companies here located, we don't have maybe the core of what you would look to as a business community to sort of spearhead a lot of sort of civic kind of things that maybe other communities are at least perceived to have, and consequently that puts the council maybe out front more so, or at risk more so than maybe normally would be. And I guess the question is to you, Wendell, is the success that you have had in Charlotte and the things that you have mentioned, is the leadership being provided by the core of your bigger businesses there in Charlotte? And if it is, relative to our situation, I mean, what suggestions or observations could you give us as to how we could come up with something in a similar thing?
Well, the question is absolutely on target. That's what I see as the great contrast. When you have the headquarters of North Carolina National Bank in the community, the First Union, and then some 25 headquartered corporations there. And when Royal Insurance relocating out of New York is coming into Charlotte, and the local core large business leaders call on them and say, we're glad to have you, but now along with that will be some responsibilities. That is a great climate to work in. And every time we have a major problem, it does not stop at the council table. It may originate there, or it may not. Today, as a matter of fact, as healthy as things are at the moment in Charlotte, there was an article in the paper this morning where the business leadership plans to raise $1 million per year for the next 3 years to promote Charlotte area as a place to locate new industry. Now, of that $3 million, they probably will ask for a total of $1 million, perhaps from the local community through the government, and on the Performing Arts Center that we would like to build, there is commitment now coming through the same leadership for perhaps $10 million. So I had alluded to the fact that earlier that you need to tap the regional resource somehow that's here, rather than think of the community in segments. And so you do have in the Hampton Roads community, I got corrected a moment ago, I've been dated by the fact we used to call it Tidewater. But But you do have some corporate leadership in the region. And you build on that, I would think, as well as develop what I think is going to be a necessity for Hampton, and that's to recognize, that's the reason I mentioned it, recognize that some of the seed money for these facilities is going to have to come first from everybody through the local government. And so you have to just acknowledge, in my opinion, if you're going to compete with some of the other communities that have these facilities given, well, you're going to have to do it yourselves to get it started. Because, as you mentioned, new industries and businesses locating, they want these facilities. It's no different. We have exactly the same problems as do you, but we do have an edge in that we have corporate leadership that will step forward.
How do you see us filling that void? Should we set our sights lower, or is it acceptable then that the council people who serve have to take really more risk and maybe get out front more, or how do we overcome that?
Well, first it might help for you to sponsor a visit to a community that is doing it and see how they have done it. And not just the leadership of the council and the manager's office, but one of the neatest things that I found in Charlotte, which I would strongly recommend, is an inner city visit. Not with a community that is beyond your horizon, but if you took the Hampton Roads community and got a group of leaders to go and look, then you would begin to see what can be, I think, and you would find out what your strengths are and what your weaknesses are, and develop a strategy for overcoming those weaknesses. I mean, we all know the strengths, and we all know some of the weaknesses. But if you go and spotlight what is happening in some other communities, and since the 50s, those kinds of trips have been undertaken by the leadership of Charlotte to many, many cities. Last year we visited Dallas. We visited Baltimore.
One every year, isn't it?
One every year. And you have great leadership. You know, you have everything going for you, but it's you've hit the key problem as I see it. If you think only of the geographic area of Hampton and don't include your total assets of the region, then I think that unfortunately you won't be able to pull it off as easily as you could otherwise.
And you must include some of the business leaders of the community in those visits in order to get them to help you carry the ball.
This will be a good stopping point. Gentlemen, here's how I'd like to proceed from this particular point. I'd like to go to a wrap-up. I need to change my tapes in the video machines to do that. So I'd like to take a couple minutes of breaks here just to get that done. Then I'd like to come back to each of you and ask you to do something between 2 to 5 minute recap.
On the questions you gave us for individuals.
I'm going to give you one particular question, and that is, what should Hampton look at? What do you perceive Hampton's future to be? What do you see that it needs to exploit? And what threats do you perceive it to have that it needs to be conscious of?
You got 2 minutes.
Break.
No problem.
For those of you who don't like one.